So Christiana and Rebecca, we're in the lived experience of the climate catastrophe crisis, or whatever it's being called right now. I would be really appreciative, Christiana, if you would just give us a sense of what is happening at this point vis-a-vis the climate.
Other than disaster,
yeah,
you want me to?
Exactly.
Well, in a nutshell, science has been abundantly clear that the current level of yearly greenhouse gas emissions is unsustainable, and that we have to not only peak emissions, but decline to 1/2 of where we are right now by 2030, which is why this decade is called, as Rebecca already reminded us, the decisive decade. Why is that so? That is so because we know that a maximum temperature rise of 1.5 degrees over what we had during the industrial age is the maximum temperature rise that we could have and still have a possibility of being able to adapt to the changes that brings, and still be able to more or less, maybe less than more, protect the most vulnerable, which for me is the most important here. And the fact is that we are already somewhere between 1.1 and 1.2 degrees above. So we have to squeeze in under that door and truly be able to have our emissions. Now, this year, we're having a stark call, alert, a red flag that is waving in front of our faces, because not only do we have the global heating that is continuing, we also have El Nino on top of that, and hence we have broken record temperatures that we haven't been able to measure, not in the human experience, but even in the planetary experience, in 120,000 years, which means that we have droughts, we have floods, we have fires, we have storms, we have heating of the oceans, the like of which we have never seen. So we're in completely unknown territory as far as disturbance of especially the natural hydro cycle of the planet. Why is that critical to us as human beings? Because we're part of the web of life. And because we have done this unto ourselves and unto all of the non-human species. It is no exaggeration to say that climate change is the mother of all injustices. It is unjust when you think about what the global north has done in the past versus what the global south is suffering now. It is unjust when you think about what our generations and previous have done versus the generations that are being born and will be born. It is unjust with respect to socioeconomic standing, because those who have a higher income have automatically a higher level of emissions and don't really experience the consequences and because they can buy themselves out, where those who have negligible emissions are the ones that are suffering the most. It is unjust from a gender perspective, because honestly, who has taken all the decisions in the past 1,000 years? It's men. And there is abundant literature that says that women and children, especially in developing countries, are the ones that are most affected. So, and you can go on and on and on about the injustice. So not only do we have a scientific situation here that is an emergency situation, we have a biodiversity and non-human situation that is degrading the web of life very quickly, well known as the sixth mass extinction. And we have this human situation that is so unjust that it is painful to even think about it.
That's quite the summary. And I, from the point of view of a Buddhist practitioner, what comes up for me is how we understand our responsibility, how we understand the importance in vis-a-vis justice of accountability, and also how we adjust, if you will. And I think the word adjust in terms of justice, how do we adjust our internal views so that we understand, not just at a conceptual level, but an embodied level, that we have a moral responsibility that is not in the long term, it's in the short term.
Yeah.
To actually shift things radically. And, the 2023 summer, this has been a dramatic shift in our lived experience vis-a-vis climate. We see, for example, forests that are so stressed. Conifers are dropping their needles. We see deciduous trees dropping their leaves in the middle of the summer as though fall had come early. We see the bleaching of the coral reefs around the world. But, in my old home, so to speak, of Florida, just to have 101 degree water 5 feet down is just really it's staggering. And what really interests me is how we can go on with the old program in the way of just not recognizing both the short-term and the long-term consequences. And what do we have as a skillful means to transform the views that have us so phenomenally self-centered? And I think in this regard, Buddhism and other religions, and other philosophies, but I can only really speak as a practitioner. This notion of a separate self, is like the main toxin. It's got
the myth. The myth.
Yeah, it's a myth, but also it's the reality that people believe in,
yes.
so to speak. As you say, it is a myth, but it's like it's substantializing it of this sense of separateness. And there are fascinating urges now, that are a part of the psychosocial continuum that are, becoming more apparent. And that is a kind of urging toward community, toward connection, toward care. These 3 C's: community, connection, not just connection with each other, of course that, but also with the natural world, and also with our sense of responsibility toward all beings and things. As you say, this is not just the suffering of human beings, this is the suffering of all species. And so, the transformation of view necessitated by the criticality that we're experiencing now, one hopes, so to speak, thank you, Rebecca, also, my own work on hope, one hopes that profound transformation of view happens quickly, so the values and behavior that follow from the transformation of view can unfold. And that's the thing, so appreciate Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings on interbeing, understanding that we're not separate from the atmosphere that we breathe. We're not separate from the currents in the ocean. We're not separate from the forests that give us the gift of oxygen. We're not separate from any species or thing. And he wrote a beautiful book called The Sun, My Heart, where, he talked about, really articulated this vision of interbeing. And Glassman Roshi, one body. And it's a fundamental view in Buddhism, that of interconnectedness, interdependence, and interpenetration. And how that arises, of course, from a base of emergency for some, which we're in, for others from the realization of, examining your own mental continuum and realizing you're not separate. There's no sense of, of an actual separate self. And I feel like, I appreciate the Buddhist perspective in this regard, but it's a perspective that many indigenous peoples hold as well. And it's a perspective that's not separate from Christianity or from Judaism or from Islam. And yet, this effort toward defining and defending the self is so radical, particularly in this capitalist society that now is global capitalism. It has, an enormous impact because it's feeding, if you will, the very tendencies within our own sort of lesser nature, so to speak, toward greed and hatred and absolute confusion or delusion.